Hi, I'm Celeste Boudreaux, author of Sherry and the Butterfly Lady, a novel about a 9-year-old girl from a dysfunctional family who makes friends with an old woman who lives in a forest cottage, and they agreed to exchange fairy tales. And so sometimes I lead workshops on writing your own personal fairy tale. So, welcome to Vital Videos about penetratingly personal and nourishing narratives using fabulous fairy tales. Our first short video in this series is, what is a fairy tale anyway? I'm going to give you some context and definition. A fairy tale falls under the broader category of folk tales, which include myths, legends, and fables, as well as fairy tales. Myths, which are generally origin stories involving gods and goddesses and idealized heroes. They often explain how things got started in the world or in mankind, like the four seasons. As another example, the Greeks tell us that all the trouble and evil in the world can be blamed on the first woman, Pandora. Gee, thanks. Legends are set in a specific time and place, involving human characters who may have been or were believed to have been real people, like King Arthur or Robin Hood. And they may or may not weave in some magical elements, but you can generally expect some level of embellishment or exaggeration. Then, of course, you have fables, which involve talking animals that act just like people and end with a moral or a lesson. So, what are fairy tales? They are usually very nebulous about their place and time. For instance, they may start out with once upon a time in a faraway country. Heroes and heroines tend to start out in lowly states and find their way to prosperity, safety, and happiness by the end. Or sometimes they start out in a high state, like a prince or princess, and they get reduced to a lowly state and then have to find their way back. But they always involve some element of magic and magical creatures, but not gods. And they're about personal journeys, not about the grand sweeps of Earth or human history. So it's actually some of those facets that make fairy tales so appropriate for applying to a personal narrative. So having put fairy tales into their context within the broader folktale category, let's look at the normal features of a fairy tale. So you can boil it down to 4 things. They're going to have a hero or heroine. They're going to have at least one villainous character. They're going to have obstacles, usually 1 to 3 obstacles to overcome. And then they're going to have several magical elements, such as spells or curses or other unbelievable or impossible events, and magical characters like fairies, talking animals, or witches or something. So while they can be written in more elaborate styles, and often are when they're being retold, the traditional fairy tale is very direct and often brief. So time is not usually spent much on character development or backstory or too many details. It's similar to a dream in which time in a fairy tale can pass very quickly without it seeming that strange. So this can also be an advantage when writing a short personal fairy tale. In the US and Canada and Western Europe, most of the fairy tales that we're familiar with have European origins, or at least we think they do. Some of them are actually borrowed from other cultures. And fairy tales are told all over the world. So many of the other fairy tales in other countries are very specific to their cultures, although there's often a lot of sharing around of basic plots. But there are plenty of fairy tales in China and Japan, India, Africa, Russia, Mexico. There's Arabic and Persian. In my book, for instance, there's a story that takes place in India and involves a family of royal peacocks. So stay tuned for the next video about fairy tale myths. common misconceptions about fairy tales. See you soon.